In many ways, the motorcycle we have here today is just the sort of bike that a lot of people are looking for. I think it's a fantastic looking machine. It has a 650cc twin-cylinder engine that gives it the sort of performance that is great for our road systems. It has a decent amount of off-road ability built in. It has a great set of features, and most of all, it costs well under 10 lakh rupees on road in Mumbai. This is the Moto Morini X-Cape 650X, and I think we should start today's story with the question, who is Moto Morini? Moto Morini is an Italian company that has been making motorcycles for over 80 years, and like most small Italian motorcycle makers, they've had a checkered history of producing some great bikes and also having plenty of financial difficulties along the way. The most recent and perhaps most significant step in its journey was when the company was bought out by a Chinese motorcycling giant Zhongyang in 2018. The X-Cape is Moto Morini's first brand new product since the Chinese takeover, and I think they've done a fantastic job with the styling. Now, there are lots of small details to appreciate, but what really captures your attention are these rally bike proportions with a big mass-heavy front end which moves over to a sleek rear section. The X-Cape is also quite nicely put together with no cheap-feeling plastics or off-putting panel gaps. The switchgear looks and feels quite decent, and you also have a large 7-inch TFT display that adds to the expensive feeling. This display works quite nicely once it's booted up, but the actual startup process is a little slow and jittery, almost like the screen is begging for more processing power. While the overall touch and feel is quite good, there were a few small areas that need improvement. For example, the windscreen adjustment mechanism refused to work on our bike, and the left-hand grip was loose and rotating on the handlebar. We also noticed a mild leak from the coolant reservoir, and then noticed that the cap is actually a rubber plug that is simply pushed into place and cannot be tightened. Nevertheless, for the most part, this comes across as a pretty decently put together motorcycle. Handsome as it may be, the X-Cape does seem to be a little confused about its own identity. For example, the company's websites and brochures all refer to this as the X-Cape 650, but the stickers on the bike, they say 64.9. Now I assume that has something to do with the capacity of this engine, which is 649cc. In fact, there's even confusion about whether those stickers are trying to say 64.9 or 649, but we'll leave that open for debate and move on to what this engine is all about. What you effectively get is a parallel twin motor that puts out 60 horsepower and 54 Newton meters of torque, and this engine feels familiar in more ways than one. That is a very familiar sound, and if you do a little bit of digging on the internet, you'll also see that the bore and stroke dimensions of this engine are identical to Kawasaki's 650. If you look even closer, you'll see that there are a few different design elements on the external cases and this Moto Morini branding, but the overall shape of the engine is identical, including the position of all the main bolts. Now, Moto Morini sources this engine from another Chinese company called CF Moto. CF Moto's website says that this is an in-house engine. I suppose it's all just a big coincidence. Given all the similarities, it's no surprise that this is a likable engine. While its power and torque figures are slightly lower than the Kawasaki, there's also the fact that this bike is significantly heavier than the likes of a Versys 650, and that reflects in the performance figures. The big difference is that this motor lacks the strong bottom end performance of the Kawasaki engine, and that effect is exaggerated by a long travel throttle that you need to twist quite far to get some strong results. But once the engine crosses 5000 RPM, the X-Cape feels enjoyably quick, and it can hold a fast highway cruise in an effortless manner. Vibrations are also well controlled, while the fueling and throttle response are quite good as well. In fact, with an 18-litre fuel tank, this bike has the ability to make for a good long-distance machine. Just as this engine is a gentle but capable performer, the same thing can be said for the Moto Morini's chassis. Now the thing to consider is that this is quite a heavy motorcycle. The company's India website lists the net weight at 215 kilos, but that's a bit misleading because it's a dry weight. Fully fueled, this bike weighs over 230 kgs, and that puts it on par with bigger machines like the Triumph Tiger 900. Still, this is quite an easy bike to ride. For starters, the weight is quite well managed, and this bike doesn't have a very top-heavy feel. It also feels nicely balanced, and the bike doesn't take much effort to ride. The fact that the X-Cape isn't very wide means that you can squeeze through the sort of gaps in jam traffic that most smaller bikes will fit through, and that's nice as well. However, I should mention that this motorcycle gets really hot in heavy traffic. Not unbearable, but definitely uncomfortable. If you encounter a fun set of corners, you'll find that the Moto Morini isn't very agile and it takes some effort to change direction. But when you get it pointed in the direction that you want, the bike feels stable and trustworthy, even on its blocky off-road tires. I also found the Brembo brakes to be perfectly up to the job, not too sharp but also powerful enough. As for the Marzocchi suspension, its setup is slightly on the firm side, but it is adjustable so you can dial some plushness back in. But even on its stock settings, the bike deals with bad roads quite nicely. Finally, there's a seating position which is comfy and quite neutral, and the seat narrows at the front, which makes it a bit easier to get your feet down. As for wind protection, I found it quite decent with some amount of helmet buffeting, but unfortunately I can't tell you how effective the windscreen adjustment is. The Morini is really quite well equipped for the price, and this is the only bike where at this sort of money you will get spoked wheels that support tubeless tires. It also has a pretty decent level of suspension travel. The suspension is quite compliant and it is adjustable. There's a decent amount of ground clearance. There's these nice Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR tires, and all of that comes together to make this quite a fun off-road machine. Now it is by far not a hardcore off-road that you want to go bashing around, but it is also a lot more encouraging and capable than the likes of a Kawasaki Versys 650 or even a Suzuki V-Strom 650. The first nice thing is that the Morini's standing ergonomics are quite good. Your legs will find a good interface to lock onto the motorcycle, the shape of the fuel tank is supportive, and the wide handlebar is set at a good height. If you want to fine-tune the handlebar placement beyond just rotating it, the risers can also be set in 3 different positions, which can bring the bar closer to you or further away. The slightly firm suspension that we mentioned earlier helps the bike to soak in medium-sized bumps or ruts quite well. The ability to turn off the rear ABS is nice as well. At the end of the day though, you can never shake the feeling that this motorcycle weighs as much as a full-sized ADV, and you've also got to be a little cautious with the ground clearance, especially if you haven't paid for the accessory engine bash guard. The X-Cape has really been quite a pleasant surprise. It's comfortable, capable, fun, and like I mentioned earlier, there is quite a lot of equipment on this motorcycle. For a bike with these looks and X in its name, it's a bit of a surprise to see that the off-road relevant things like handguards, a metal engine bash guard, and crash protection are all optional extras. And a main stand isn't even an option at all. Still, at 7.4 lakh rupees ex-showroom, the asking price is just 20,000 more than the standard X-Cape, which apart from the wheels is otherwise identical to this motorcycle. That's quite tempting, especially since this is the only bike in the class that gets things like tire pressure monitoring, 2 riding modes, those tubeless spoked wheels, and it also doesn't skimp out on important stuff like the suspension and brake components. Come to think of it, this is easily the nicest and most impressive Chinese origin bike that I've ridden so far, and I think it does offer you quite a lot for the money. However, there are a couple of things that you need to seriously think about if you're considering buying this motorcycle. The first is that the long-term reliability of this motorcycle is currently a complete unknown. The second question is perhaps even more pertinent, and that's whether this company can provide the sort of long-term, high-quality after-sales experience that such an expensive product absolutely deserves. Now obviously, I can't really give you a fair or accurate answer to either of those two concerns at this point in time. However, if you're willing to look past them, well then I can tell you that based on what I've experienced so far, this is really quite a likable motorcycle.